Last Saturday, I was going to Canberra to teach the children's SEAL program at the Sri Lankan temple there. And I was supposed to go and visit one of our friends who was having cancer, a lady. And I said, yeah, since I will be in Canberra after the program, I'll visit her. But actually, before I do the whole talk, may I invite people who are able to switch on their camera, because it's very helpful for me to see at least a few people rather than talking to black boxes. Thank you very much. Whoever who can, that would be very helpful. Okay. So on Friday afternoon, I got a phone call from his husband saying, my wife passed away. I never got to see his wife, who I was going to see and have a chat. I mean, I know her, but I didn't get to have that meeting with her. So this is how quickly death can come. I was to see her on Saturday afternoon, but Friday by midday, she already passed away. So instead of going in the afternoon on my way to the children's Dhamma school, in the morning, early morning, I went to their house, actually seen or been with a dead body that is not prepared. Like they left the dead body in the bed for till the next day. So when I arrived in the morning, the lady was still on her bed as she has passed away. She had passed away quite peacefully, but it was the first time for me to see somebody not really prepared, nicely set in a coffin, but just how she died on her bed. And then on Wednesday, I also conducted her funeral, which was quite moving again to know a person. She has been somebody who had actually done her practice quite well, somebody who had actually died quite well. So it's actually really nice. I might tell some stories about her or how she did, because it's relevant to this talk. But this is totally unexpected. This topic was given many months ago, but this just happened. And on this Friday, the family came to the Santi Forest Monastery for a 7-day almsgiving. And she has 2 grandchildren who are under 10. And they were wanting to know what happened to Nana, as they call her, the grandma. Where did she go? What happened to her? So, you know, all these things about death quite, you know, was quite in my life, at my face, so to speak, in the last week. So I'm quite ready for this topic, in fact, for some time. And it's Friday to join this ceremony, and he felt very sick and he couldn't come. So again, sickness and death happens so suddenly, as we know, right? And then I also had to end up giving the Friday night talk for in place of Bhante Sujato. Again, I chose the topic death. So I've been talking about death and dying and how to prepare for a whole week now. So it is quite nice, because we don't often think about death. Some people are actually scared to think about death, thinking that if I think about it, it'll bring that on. But this is not, I'm sure, as Dhamma practitioners, this is not your attitude, but this is quite common in the world. And even in some cultures, they say, shush, shush, don't talk about it, you know. They don't like even to mention the word death in some cultures. But this is not how the Buddha taught. The Buddha said, Maranasati, you know, recollection of the death is a very important topic. And why is that? You know, because we often think, yeah, death happens, so what's the big deal? Why is it so important to think about death? And you think that when you think about death, you might feel sad, you might remember all your attachments and get fear. You would think that that's what would come. But yeah, that would come if you don't know how to do it properly. But if you know how to do this death contemplation properly, then in fact, it makes your life much better, much more peaceful, much more joyful in a very good way. So I hope at the end of the talk, that's the message that you're going to get, because this is very important to have a right attitude about death and to how to reflect on death in the right way. Like Manori said in the very beginning, it is something that is unavoidable. Life is uncertain. Death is certain. And what is the first gift that you get when you are born? That is the idea of death, because this is the one certain thing that would happen. And I would like to just share a very beautiful story from the Dhammapada Atthakatha. So this is not EBTs, but still it's a very beautiful story. I will just say it in summary, but if you would like to read it, it is the commentary on the Dhammapada 174. So if you want to look up the full story, you can look it up. It's quite a nice story. I will tell it in brief. So in this story, the Buddha was traveling to a town called Alavi. And once he's there, he gives the Dhamma sermon about Maranasati, about death contemplation, how important it is. And he manages to inspire the crowd and give clear instructions on how to do this. And there was a 16-year-old young girl who got really inspired by this teaching, and he really took it on board. And she decided to do this practice for the next few years. So now in here, I'll interrupt the story and tell how death contemplation is really done. You would hear many people and many teachers give very different types of guided meditations, and they are all very good and very nice if it works for you. And that is no problem. But the Buddha's teaching on death contemplation, Maranasati, is a very simple one. And that is just to remember that I will die. And that is for sure. And my death can happen anytime. Because this is not what is in the background of our mind, right? Even somebody who is 85 years old would still feel that they're living for another 20, 30, 40 years. This is the general feeling we have. Like by 85, we know there's not probably much time left, but this is not the feeling we have, much less to say anybody younger than that. We have this feeling of living for a long time. When we talk about it, we feel, yeah, my death can happen, but this is not our feeling. So the idea of death is that my death can happen anytime. And what happens is we know at the time when we die, if our mind is defiled, then it's quite dangerous. Because, you know, there are so many suttas, so many discourses where the Buddha talks about what happens if you die with a defiled mind. If you die with anger, if you die with lots of desires, if you die with fear, with all these anxieties, what will happen? It's not a good destination. So what happens is if you have this idea of death in the back of your mind, you actually make amends very quickly. Because, you know, unless there are any enlightened beings in the audience, you know, anybody unenlightened, the nature of human minds is to have defilements. And the nature of defilements is to do silly things from time to time. So all of us are guilty about that, right? From time to time, our speech isn't great, our actions aren't the best, and things like that happen. But the thing is, it is important that we clear our mind, purify our mind as soon as possible, because while you are harboring that anger or that strong desire, you might just slip, fall, and hit your head and die right there and then. And this happens, right? You hear about this from time to time. It is not uncommon. This kind of sudden deaths, accidents are very common. So why not? It could happen to us. So this is why I might speak a little bit more again after the story. So it is really important. So the idea of this is that while you're walking, you still have the idea of, I could die before I reach my destination. While you're doing your work, you still have that recollection. Before I complete my task, I might die. While you are engaged in conversation, still the idea of death is at the back. So you know you should speak nicely, right speech, you know, in a kind way, because what happens if you could die mid-sentence, this can happen. This happens to people sometimes, right? So the idea of death, the Maranasati is like that, just having that. So this young girl, the 16-year-old girl, while she was walking, she was seated, while she was going to bed, while she was doing her chores, she constantly had this idea that I would die, and that's for sure in her mind. So 3 years after, Buddha was in a nearby town, and as you would have heard, from with his divine eye, sometimes early in the morning, he looks and see who can benefit from my service today. And then he sees this young lady, now she's about 19 years of age, that she is ripe in her practice. She has reached to a point that she could, if the Buddha can give a little bit more help, a little bit of instructions, that she could at least gain stream entry or even higher. So the Buddha sees, but he also sees that her death is not that far, in fact. So she's probably going to die quite soon as well. So he then decides, I will travel to Alavi for the benefit of this young girl. And so he and his monks travel to Alavi, and the people of Alavi hears about it, and they prepare a big meal for the Sangha. And the girl also heard about it, and she was very excited. She's very happy because she was very impressed by the teachings of the Buddha 3 years ago, and she's been constantly practicing. And so she was very much looking forward to again being in the presence of the master and listen to some more Dhamma. However, that morning, and she is the daughter of a weaver. So her father makes cloth. So he has a factory, and also at home, the girl also helps him. And her father has got a big order that morning. And so he was very stressed because he had to finish it. So he asked his daughter, can you please help me to finish this order before the evening? Because otherwise I'm going to be in trouble. So now the daughter's plans were a little bit changed, because, you know, she knew she has to care for his father, otherwise his father will be upset, and that is not good. So she wanted to, out of gratitude and kindness, help her father as well. So she worked really, really hard. So she couldn't go and participate in the dana, but she worked really hard, but she was determined to go and listen to the Dhamma talk. So she managed to finish everything just after the meal time, and she was carrying the material and walking towards the factory, and she thought maybe she can drop off the material and come back to the sermon. But the Buddha actually saw that the girl hasn't arrived. So he was actually waiting in silence after the meal, waiting for the girl to arrive to give the Dhamma talk, because he especially went there for this special young girl. So when he saw her going by, he made eye contact with her, and she realized that this is the time now she should go and listen to this sermon. So she, instead of going to deliver the material, went and sat in the audience. When she sat down, the Buddha asked this question from this little girl, young girl. He asked, where have you come from? To that the girl said, I don't know. And then the Buddha said, where are you going? And the girl said, I don't know. And the Buddha said, don't you know? And the girl says, I know. Do you know? The Buddha said. And she said, I don't know, Venerable Sir. So this is very confusing, right? So it's just like you all, the whole Alavi audience was also thinking, what's wrong with this girl? Why is she answering like this? It's so disrespectful. Is she mad? Why is she talking like this answering like this to the Buddha, you know? Such simple questions. Why is she answering in this confusing way? So of course, there was a reason for the Buddha to ask this question. So the Buddha realizes, of course, the people at Alavi are now confused, but they're also now paying attention because it's so interesting. Why? What is happening? So then the Buddha further questions the girl. He says, when I ask you, where have you come from? You said, no. Why did you say like that? So the girl said, well, everybody here knows I live in that house, in my father's house down the road, and that is where I have come from. But that is not what you asked me, Venerable Sir. What you asked me is, where have I come to this life? Where was I in my past life? Where have I come to this world? And to that, I don't have that information. I don't have that knowledge. I don't know where I have come to this world. And that is why I said, I don't know. And when you ask me the question, where are you going? Everybody knows that I'm on my way to my father's factory, taking all this material to deliver this order to my father. So everybody knows this, and this is not what you asked me. You asked me, do I know after I die, where am I going? Where is my next rebirth? That too, I don't know. That is why I said, I don't know where I'm going. And then you ask me, don't you know? And what you asked me was, don't you know that you're going to die? That I definitely know I'm going to die. That's why I said, I know. I definitely know I am going to die one day. But then you ask, do you know? And what you meant was, do you know when you're going to die? That I don't know. So the girl said, I don't know when I'm going to die. I definitely know that I'm going to die, but I don't know when that is going to happen. So it's quite interesting. And while this conversation was happening, it opened up further her mind, and an insight arose. And in the story, it says that she became a stream winner. And after that, she actually goes to the factory to deliver the material. And at the factory, she meets with an accident and she dies. And her father runs back so upset, so worried, and comes to the Buddha. He sees the Buddha there, and then the Buddha actually utters this beautiful Dhammapada verse that I have it here. I will read it out for you. Blind is the world. Few are those who clearly see. As few birds escape from a net, few go to a blissful state. And he says that to the father, not to worry, that his daughter was very wise and was able to really realize the Dhamma and is in a good place and will continue on. So the important thing is, this is just to sort of say how important it is to do this practice and prepare. Because for us, for most of us, what we hear in our life is that success is about, getting a good job, earning a lot of money, having a good family, having lots of material things. This is what usually the world says as success. And I'm sure all of you in the audience here are successful people. You have all, I'm sure, have achieved all those goals by now. But if your death happens tonight or soon after this Dhamma talk, it can happen, right? It can happen anytime. Can you take your wealth with you, your house with you, your family with you, or even your knowledge with you? You can't, right? All those things that we normally call as success, they have to be left behind. So what really is success? And that is having a good rebirth or no rebirth, being the highest, right? So as we know, once we depart from here, we travel alone. None of our family members, none of those things come with us. And what is the only thing that travels with us, with our stream of consciousness? That is the karma. Right? The karma is the only thing, that is your intentional actions by body, speech, and mind. That is the only thing that travels with us. So if you are wanting to be successful in life, then the success is by doing what is needed to be done to have a good death, right? So the highest being not coming back at all, dying as an arahant, or anything less than that is a good death. Whatever it is, trying to do your very best, living your spiritual journey to your best ability, when you're doing that, that is in fact can be seen as preparation for a good death. It's a nice way to look at your spiritual path. It is about that, right? So when you look at your success in that way, then you would ask the question, so what is it that I can do to prepare for my death, right? So there are many things. We can have a whole series of Dhamma talks on this subject, because all of the Buddha's discourses can be related to this. As I said, the whole gradual training, the whole spiritual path is about having a good death, preparing for a good death, the best being becoming an arahant. But I will just mention some of the things that are relevant to us, for most of us here and now in our day-to-day life, right? For most people, we are busy people, have very little time, and we still don't know that can come anytime. So for some people, when you think like that, a little bit of anxiety starts to come. Yeah, what she's telling is true. It might happen. What if it is happening? Am I ready? How can I be ready quickly? Right? These kinds of things come. Sometimes some people start to worry about it. So worrying about is definitely not the thing to do. So the best thing to do is to remember that in your life, you have tried your very best. You have tried your very best to live and do good things. Certainly, I'm sure each one of you have have done things that you're not very proud of. That happens because that is the nature, like I mentioned, an unenlightened mind. But the important thing is if your death is happening, and it is going to happen soon, is to change your focus into the good things that you have done in your life. Right? So that is one of the things that you can prepare, to recall and recollect the goodness of your life, the things that you did right. So that should bring some joy into your life. And then another thing, if you want to prepare for a good death, is that you also remember the things that you didn't do so well. And then you see, how can I make amends? So don't let your ego to get in the way of saying sorry and asking for forgiveness. So sometimes you know that some things that you did are not right, but sometimes it's really hard for some people to say sorry and ask for forgiveness. But this becomes so very important. Now to this, I'm going to mention a little bit about near-death experiences. So some of you may know quite a bit about this. Some of you may not know much about it, but a very beautiful book came out. If you are interested to know a little bit more about this, I highly recommend. It's a really good read. It's called, the name of the book is After, very easy to remember, After. And the author is Dr. Bruce Grayson. He's one of the leading researchers on this subject. He's
recording in progress.
Psychiatrist from USA. And he has been doing research on this subject for more than 40 years. So he has many thousands of cases. And people from different religious backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different belief systems, different age groups, different educational backgrounds. So it's a variety of people. So what was very interesting for me when I read all these different case studies was that what is common to all of them, what is common to all of these hundreds of thousands of people would be what happens when we die. Wouldn't you agree? Because if that is the common thing to all of these people who have a full near-death experience, because there are partial as well, but I'm talking about people who have a full near-death experience, what's common to all of them would be something that would happen. And then I also traced it back to the suttas. What did the Buddha say about this? And interestingly, some of the main points that the Buddha mentioned are exactly the same, what these people that are of all different backgrounds experience. So there are many differences, but the main milestones are very similar. So it's very interesting. So if I focus on a couple of those are the things that are very likely to happen when we die. Because this is interesting to know, right? what might happen when we die? It's an important question, an important thing to reflect and be prepared. So I may not say, because it's not a lot of time, but I will just mention a few of the things that that stood out for me personally. And that gives you a good indication on how to prepare for your own death, because these are people who actually died and they came back and they have a memory of what happened when they died. So that is why it's called near death. And they were only dead for a couple of minutes only. But it is interesting, they have a very profound experience during that time. So one of the things, there are a couple of things that happen, but one of the things that every single person who has a full near-death experience, what they say is that they say they have a whole life review. That means they remember from the time they were born up until they died, everything that happened to them, that they did in their life. And you would wonder, if you were dead only for like a couple of minutes, how can you remember? We can't even remember everything that happened yesterday, let alone a whole week, right? But the mind, the functioning of the mind, the abilities of the mind is very different. This is another thing, like when the mind is released from the body, it has enormous power. And it has enormous power to recollect, remember, and understand many things much deeper than we would otherwise. So these people see and know what they did. And what do you think stands out for them? You would think, the important events, like maybe your wedding, your first child, your first job, buying your house, some big events. But no, what they really recollect, what really stands out for them is the day-to-day interactions with people. So if you actually take a slice of your life, a huge amount of your time is about that, right? About the same people, your people at home, people you see every day, your interactions with them is a huge part of your life. How you talk to them, how you deal with them, this is a huge part of your life. There are big events, that good things that you have done, special things that you have done, both good and bad, they too will stand out. But a huge part of your life is who you are as a person. But the interesting thing is, at the time you're going to see it like a movie. You are like standing and you watch yourself in action. You can see how you talk, how you behaved, but not only that, you're also going to find out how the other people felt when you spoke or you did things. This is really interesting. I never knew that you would have that kind of information as well. I'll tell you one story which was really astonishing for me when I heard that, but it is important to know. And this is a story about a truck driver. This truck driver, when he was a young man, when he was driving a truck quite fast, somebody just cut across on the road. So you know how hard it is to stop a fast truck, right? But he manages to stop the truck and save that person's life. But the truck driver was quite mad, so he starts to swear at the man. At that, the man whose life was saved starts to swear back at the truck driver. So the truck driver gets really mad. He gets out of the truck and go and punch this man. And he says he left the man in a bloody mess and drove off. But later in his life, the truck driver has a near-death experience. And this memory is also one of his memories. I mean, he has all the memories. So he speaks about this. He says, when he saw this incident, he had a lot more information about the incident. He realized a lot about the other person, because you are able to encompass the other person's mind, because your mind has that power when it is released from the body. He said he realized that other man who crossed the road, he has just lost his wife. He was grieving and he was in the pub completely drunk, and he was drunk when he just crossed the road. So he didn't know anything. But not only that, when the truck driver gave him the punches, he realized he has punched him 32 times. He even could count it. And he felt how the other person felt when he punched him, both emotionally and physically. And he even felt how the internal bleeding was happening in the other person. And he realized he had a lot of pain. All of this became his understanding. So this is how much we might find out about our consequences of our actions. So this was a bit scary, you know, this is actually scary. So, but this is what people say, that they do understand. So this is not only for the bad things, but also for the good things. Now, most of you are good people. You have done many good things, right? So you will also find out, even by one word, a good help that you have given, how far somebody has gone with that. So that also works, right? At the moment you think, oh, that's a very ordinary, simple thing that I did. But at the time of your death, you will say you have changed somebody's life by doing something small. So that is how, so it evens out in a good way. But just to give an understanding, this is important. So every single person who had a full near-death experience, once they came back, they became very virtuous people. Didn't matter what religion, what belief system, what they believe, but they realized their intentional actions had consequences, and that mattered. So each one of them, they realized the life is not about getting things done or achieving goals, but it is about how you do it, right? How you do it. And people are more important than getting things done. So this is really important for a lot of us, even myself included. So most of us are quite task-oriented people. And sometimes we are working in a team. It is quite common to say, this is not what I asked you to do. This is not how it should have been done. You know, you have wasted time, you have wasted money. By doing so, we have hurt many people in our life, right? Because we wanted this perfect job done. But once you understand the consequences, people are more important. How we deal with them, how we speak to them, this is what matters when we come to our deathbed. So the things that we have done, who will remember them? Yeah, maybe one or two people will remember for a little while, but those things are forgotten. Your perfect job, the task you achieved, that is forgotten. But how you dealt, who you were as a person, that is what is important. So this is karma. So for all those people, whether they call it karma and vipaka, they had an insight about the working of karma. So it is interesting, right? And also another thing is, even if there were people who were materialistic people who thought there was only one life, there is no life beyond, they definitely understood that there's life after death. So there are interesting things. So this rebirth and karma and vipaka is very important to remember and have, and they are right view and basis of the Buddhist teaching. So once you have that understanding, once you have, then it also gives you a understanding how to live your life well and how to prepare for the death. So so therefore, the first thing, one of the important things is looking after your sila. So being a virtuous person. So to this, it is really hard to sort of remember all the details. There is a very beautiful sutta, and this is what the Buddha taught his 7-year-old son. This is in the Ambalattika Rahulovada Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya. The Buddha says his little son, this is just a summary, if you are about to do anything by body or anything by speech or even any thoughts that you are going to have, before you do that, see whether that's going to hurt yourself or hurt another. And while you're doing it, see whether it is hurting yourself or hurting another or hurting both. After having done that by body, speech, and mind, reflect and see, was it hurtful for yourself, hurtful for another, hurtful for both? If that is the case, don't do it. So this is a very simple way of learning how to keep virtue, how to keep your sila. If you can't remember all the precepts, and if you can't understand how and what is the right thing to do, this is a simple way to understand how to guide yourself. And another really important one, another way of the Buddha's beautiful ability to give in different pariyas, different angles, these teachings, this comes up in the Sakkapanya Sutta. If you want a reference, that is Digha Nikaya Sutta number 21. Here the Sakka, the Lord of the Devas, asks a series of questions. I won't go into detail because then I will run out of time on this topic. But there the Sakka asks, how should one practice the spiritual path so that we can develop? And the Buddha says, whatever actions that you do by body, speech, and mind, see after having done that action, whether your wholesome states are increasing, unwholesome states are decreasing. If your wholesome states are increasing, unwholesome states are decreasing, then continue. Do that. You're doing the right thing. But when you're doing that action, your unwholesome states are increasing, wholesome states are decreasing, then stop, review, and see how you're doing it, and do it in a way that wholesome states are increasing, unwholesome states are decreasing. This is, again, in a nutshell, how to guide yourself, how to do the right thing, how to prepare so that you don't have regrets and remorse in your life as much as possible. This is not too hard to remember. This is not too hard to apply. Even a little kid, if they remember this, can do this. But this is really important to become a successful person, in the sense to prepare for our death, to do the right thing, to live the life to our best ability, so that you don't make those silly mistakes as much as possible. So if you remember these two simple instructions, one given to his 7-year-old little son and one to the Lord of the Devas, then you know how to guide. This is looking after your sila, the aspect of sila. So this is really important. And this is actually the major part of the preparation, because how you die is a lot to do with how you live. Because there is also this understanding that the last thought moment is what matters. This is not a direct teaching. This is actually a commentarial thing, but regardless, we know how the consciousness works. So last thought would matter. But the important thing to remember is last thought is not under your control. Now, to this, some of you may have heard this story, but I'm going to tell a joke to make this point. And this is from Ajahn Brahm. So this is, but it makes a good point. So that is why I'm going to say this, because this is very much in the people's mind that last thought counts. So if I can take care of my last thought, if I find the tricks to get that right, then I'll be good. So there was this man. He's a businessman. He has a shop and he's very obsessed with his shop, and he works 7 days a week. As you would know, there are people like this, right? And he works really hard and he's very rich. He has a lot of money. So his wife is, of course, happy about it, but she's a little concerned about him. And he says, honey, one day you are also going to die, but it's important that you take care of yourself. What happens after death? So maybe at least once a month, one day on the Poya day, can you please go to the temple and listen to a Dhamma sermon and give some donations? So at least you have some good merit, so you can have a good life, good rebirth. So the husband also thinks that wife is right. Well, that's also important. Okay, never mind. One day a month I can do. So he decides to do that. So he goes to listen to the Dhamma sermon and give a donation. And one of the sermons that he hears, the monk says, when it comes to death, what matters most is the last thought moment. And if you remember Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha on your last moment, then you'll be okay. Then he thinks, yes, now I know I don't have to go to listen to any more Dhamma sermons and give any more donations. I know how to work this out. He has 3 sons. So he goes home and decides to rename his 3 sons Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, because he is sure at his deathbed, his whole family will be there. His sons will be there. So there's no way that he will forget the 3 sons. So this was his plan. So then, strangely enough, his plan works. So he is on his deathbed. So all of his family is around him. So his 3 sons are there. So he's very happily looking at them, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So he's very happy. His plan is working. And then he suddenly remembers, if Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, the 3 sons are here, who's at the shop? At that point, he dies. So you get the point? Because his whole life, his concern was his shop. So this is what happens. So how we have inclined our mind, that is how it's going to happen. So this is really important for us to remember. So don't be heedless with our mind. Yeah, so it is really, really important. The sila of the mind, the mental sila, the restraint of the mind, that is the most important one, the virtue of the mind. So by body, most of us are quite good. We don't go running around killing people, stealing things and things like that. So our bodily conduct is pretty good. And a lot of us can do a bit more improvement on our speech, but still that is also reasonably good for most people who are practicing. But it is the mind that we are very heedless. And I think during the last Dhamma sermon as well, where we were talking about inclining the mind to seclusion, we touched on this subject about mental restraint and how beautiful that is when the mind is contented. So the sila and how you use your mind matters a lot, especially when it comes to your death. And this is what's going to come. So the practices that you use during your day, during your life, comes to you. And at this point, I'm going to tell you a personal story, a story from my own life. So this was a time when I was still a lay person, I would also say a young and stupid young girl. Not a girl, I was in my 20s. I was already working. And I was in Perth at the time. And one of my friends, a childhood friend, has come to visit me after like many, many years, after about a decade. And he was there also for work. So we only had the evenings to sightseeing and do these kinds of stuff. So in Perth, in Western Australia, there is an island called Penguin Island. And you can actually wade through the ocean to this island. So you can walk there about 1 kilometer. So it was evening time. And we went to this island to have a look around. And we also watched the sunset and started walking back. And while still talking a lot, because we are still catching up, and suddenly I couldn't touch the floor anymore. And why I said I was young and stupid? First thing, there was nobody else going at that time of the day. And why is that? Because evening time, it's high tide. There are a lot of currents in the water. And I was stupid enough not to realize that. So the high tide was coming and we got shifted away into deep waters. Why I was stupid? Also, I can't swim. So what was I doing in the ocean, right? So this is scary, but whatever it is, now I was going to drown because I can't swim and I can't touch the floor. So very barely when you're about to drown, so you're doing all these things, all these different movements, and I was trying to keep my head above the water. My friend can swim, but he's only very small, so he can't really carry me and swim. We will both die because it's quite far distance to. So I told him, maybe you try and swim and see whether you can bring somebody to help me. I'll try and see whether I can stay afloat. But, as I said, sun has already set. So it is getting dark. And this tiny little head in the middle of the ocean, who's going to find it? Right? Even if a boat came, very rare chances that I would survive. So it's a really critical time. And I was now doing all these movements to try to keep afloat. And I realized my muscles were getting very fatigued. I realized I have very little time left now. I might start to drown and die. So at that time, even though I was a born Buddhist, in my younger years, I haven't really heard the suttas. And you would all recall, suttas weren't that popular about 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, right? So I haven't actually heard that many suttas. I didn't know much about the Dhamma, but this is the time that I have actually started my spiritual path. I have started to learn the suttas and started to meditate. So I was thinking, what a shame. I've just started my spiritual practice and I'm going to die now. What to do? It's there, and there is no bargain with death. You can't tell, please hang on, give me another time, give me a little bit more time. You can't do this. When death comes, it comes, right? So it's at my face. So then I remember the power of truth affirmations, because when you are faced with death, you will try anything, right? Even if you are a skeptic, you will still do it. So I did a power of truth affirmation, recollecting the Buddha's qualities, and said, may I be saved on this day. But of course, you don't know the power of that, but that wasn't the interesting thing. The most important point, what I want to tell you, is what happened after that. So I have really let go. After having done that, after realizing that there is very little chance that I will die, I thought, okay, may I be born in a place where I could continue my practice. And I just started to relax. At that time, so I haven't started drowning. I haven't left my body. I still had also what many people who have a near-death experience have, and that was a bright light. I started experiencing because I have let go. With my mind, I was already releasing, yeah? So I started to feel very, very calm. But at that time, the qualities of the Buddha came. So in this life, up until that time, I have never done Buddhanusati meditation. I have never done recollection of the Buddha practice in this life. But one of the first things that I wanted to learn when I started my serious Dhamma practice and Dhamma study was to understand the meaning of the Itipiso Gatha. I knew since a little child to say it like a parrot, the Itipiso, but I didn't know the meaning. But I have just learned the meaning of the 9 qualities of the Buddha. But still, I didn't know how to do it as a practice. But interestingly, at that time, each word, Arahang, Samma Sambuddho, like that it is coming, and with the meaning, and with that, my mind is becoming very, very joyous, very, very blissful, very, very peaceful. So it's really, really interesting that this happened. And while I was doing that, then I heard this sound, oi, oi, from the back. And then there was somebody from the ocean side on a kayak. And then I went and held on to that kayak, and that's how my life was saved. I won't go into too much detail about the rest of the exciting story, but the important part was, where did that come from? Where did that Buddhanusati come from? So that gave me confidence that I may have been a Buddhist in a past life. I may have done Buddhanusati meditation in my past life. Even though this life I have not yet started, I may have done it quite strongly, that when I was faced with death, even in this life, that came at the very, very end of my life. I was about to die. So this came. Right? So it's really powerful to know. And if you look at the scriptures, this is what the Buddha say. If anybody practice Buddhanusati isn't the only one, but there are a few other practices. Buddhanusati is one of those practices. If you do that, you have some guarantee. If you do it properly, if you make it a vehicle, you really practice seriously Buddhanusati, then you have a guarantee that your immediate next life will be a good one, and you will find the Dhamma in your next life, because that is the last thought, is the qualities of the Buddha, which are beautiful mind states, right? So this is really important to know if you want to die well. So Buddhanusati is one of those things as well. And I told you this story to say that it's actually not just there, it's not a myth, it's not just in the scriptures, it happened to me. right? It happened to me that at the time that I was about to die, Buddhanusati practice came very powerfully, making my mind very, very bright, very, very clear. And it was a very beautiful way. If I died that time, I'm sure it would have been a good death. So this is why I'm also bringing, so that if you are wanting to prepare for a good death, look into your scriptures, there are quite a few different meditations that the Buddha recommend. Metta meditation or any one of the Brahma Vihara meditations are there. Buddhanusati is there, Dhammanusati, Sanghanusati, all of those are there, but also Maranasati. So this Dhamma talk is giving a lot of the different meditations. So Maranasati itself is a very good thing, because when you remember that it might be your last moment, you actually prepare your mind in a good way. There's no time to harbor anything bad. So you have trained yourself in that way if you've been practicing Maranasati as well. So it's quite nice to know some of these things. So if I were to summarize all these things, what happens or how to prepare to have a good death, one of the things is to remember and recollect the good things that you have done, what went right in your life, and bring up joys, rejoice, even recollecting your generosity, that is Chaganusati. So you can bring those up. And also taking care of your virtue. So whatever actions that you do by body, speech, and mind, make it wholesome and make effort every wakeful moment. So this is being a good person, keeping your virtue, especially in your day-to-day things, just your simple interactions with your people, how you do your normal things. So again, that also makes it really clear that your practice is not when you sit in your cushion or when you go on a retreat. Practice happens every wakeful moment, because every wakeful moment you are guarding your mind, you are directing your speech, you are looking after your actions, and you're doing the work. And this is what the Buddha says, being very close time to the Vesak period. It is also beautiful to recall the last words of the Buddha. What did he say? Vaya Dhamma Sankara Appamadena Sampade Tabbang. And that is all these conditioned phenomena, all these things, all this body, the mind, the perceptions, all of those things are completely unreliable. They are impermanent, they are transient, they are constantly changing. So work with diligence, do your work. And what is that work? It is this work, preparing and doing this work. So if you are, at the very least, taking care of how you speak to the people around you, how is your bodily actions, and how do you direct your mind in a day-to-day, and guard yourself, take care of that, then you're doing not just the Buddha's work, but also it is immediately important if death happens, because one of these days, it's going to be your last one. And it could be anytime, because this is what that beautiful story is about. Yeah, the young girl was telling, I definitely know I'm going to die, but when that is going to happen, I do not know. And this is true for all of us. And that is why diligence, there's no time to waste time. And it is not about really now trying to enforcing yourself and really struggling to get into deep meditation and all of those things. It's great if you can do that, but you can't do that by force, as you know, right? You have to be first where you are at, start from there with the simple things. Just take care of your day-to-day actions by body, speech, and mind. And then you would have done much for your own practice, as well as preparation for your death, and being a very successful human being who is ready to die anytime. So I will stop the main Dhamma talk here. And it would be nice to hear some comments, feedbacks, agreements, disagreements, or any questions about this. And after that, we can do the last 10 minutes, a guided meditation. Does that sound okay? Yeah. Okay, so maybe anybody who has a question can unmute and ask or put it into chat. I don't know how it works.